What's up guys, hope you're having a good day and hopefully you've been enjoying the bets that we've been winning together recently. If you've been watching my breakdown videos over the last few weeks, you'll know that in this video here I recommended a bet on Yasmin Lasindu to beat Polyana Viana. You can see by the title of the video I've said there's an amazing bet on this card. Fortunately for us, Lasindu came through for us in a big way by pretty much dominating Polyana Viana after having a little bit of trouble on the ground very early in round one. And then a few weeks before that, you can see by the title and thumbnail here that we recommended a bet on Justin Gaethje at underdog odds to beat Dustin Poirier, and of course Gaethje came through for us in a big way as well. So obviously you've seen the thumbnail, the title for this video, where I am also going to be betting Taila Santos this weekend to beat Erin Blanchfield. It is a difficult fight for Taila Santos, but I do also feel it's a good stylistic matchup for her, and we'll be getting into the reasons why I think she's a good bet to beat Blanchfield when we break down that fight in just a little bit. So if you like these breakdown videos, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. And also, if you like the breakdown videos for all the main card fights, don't forget that over on my website, MMABettingTips.com, you can find breakdown videos for every single fight on every single UFC card, which includes the prelims. And next week, we've got a very interesting card coming up, taking place in Paris, France, headlined by Cyril Gane versus Sergey Spivak. So if you'd like me to do a live stream where I research that fight with you guys collectively as a group, hit the like button below, and if this video gets 200 likes, we'll do that live stream next week, very early next week. If you look at my live streams, we've been, researching some of the big fights recently collectively as a group. I love researching fights with you guys because you drop major knowledge. You point things out that I wouldn't be aware of. Had I not worked with you guys to research these fights, you just make the whole fight research process a lot more fun. So I'd love to do that with you guys. Hit the like button below, 200 likes on this video, and we will get it going. And yeah, one other thing, obviously this card this weekend is a really good card. I love these low-key fight night cards. My win rate on being profitable on UFC Fight Night cards is actually 75%, so I make a profit on 75% of the UFC Fight Night cards that I bet in live betting. Live betting is obviously my speciality. I talk about this in every video. Live betting is my bread and butter. I'm still profitable on pre-fight bets, but live betting is really where I excel. That is like my speciality. And so if you'd like to live bet with me this weekend, UFC Fight Night Holloway versus Korean Zombie, head on over to my website, go to the live betting tips page. You can sign up there. If you don't like it, just send me a DM, email, anything like that. You get in contact with me. It's pretty easy to get in contact with me. We'll get you a refund straight away, no problem. But I think you'll like it a lot. Like I say, I make a profit on 75% of fight night cards. So, if you watch the UFC every week, probably going to be a pretty good thing for you to do to live bet them with me. I think you'll like it. I think you'll love it, in fact. If you don't, no problem. Get in contact and we'll get you a refund, no problem. But give it a try. You can see our results here. We make a profit almost every month. I think you will like it a lot. Anything else for us to talk about? I don't think so. So it's time for us to break down the first fight that I want to talk about on this card, which is going to be Junior Tafa versus Parker Porter. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Parker Porter is the slight underdog at average odds of around 2.25, which is going to be plus 125 for an implied probability of 44%. If we take a look at the odds on Tafa, he's the slight favourite at average odds of around 1.67, which is going to be minus 149 for an implied probability of 60%. So Tafa is 26 years old, 6'3", with a 72-inch reach, and Porter, 38 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 75-inch reach. So we can see that there's not a massive difference in size between these two, because you've got Tafa a little bit taller, but then a shorter reach than Parker Porter. So no massive size difference between these two, but of course with Tafa's body type, he is longer and taller. Parker Porter smaller, more compact. Now, in terms of the age, there's obviously a pretty big age gap here. 12-year age gap between the two, which statistically means the younger fighter wins over 70% of the time. So the age statistics heavily favour Tafa in this fight, and part of that is because he's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight, where at 26 years old he's going to be a sponge, constantly learning new skills, whereas Parker Porter at 38 years old, he's going to be declining a lot from fight to fight. Now that he's in the tail end of his career, his body's not going to be as capable of doing the things that it did when he was younger. So age, definitely a big advantage for Tafa in this one. What's interesting about this matchup is we've obviously seen Parker Porter lose to Junior Tafa's brother, Justin Tafa, by first round knockout. Which is very interesting, because I actually think Junior Tafa is better than his brother. I think he's faster, he's more technical, he's more athletic, he throws a higher volume of strikes. His ground game is arguably a lot better as well, even though we haven't seen a whole lot of it. At least he knows what he's supposed to do on the ground, whereas historically Justin Tafa has looked completely lost on the ground. But obviously the ground game for both guys is still a big issue, and we saw that in Junior Tafa's debut against Mohammed Usman. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, I actually think this is a more difficult stylistic matchup for Parker Porter than when Porter fought Justin Tafa, which is Junior's brother. But that doesn't necessarily mean this is a particularly good stylistic matchup for Junior Tafa. Just because Porter lost to Justin doesn't mean, you know, he's going to go out here and get absolutely smoked by Junior, because to be fair, you know, what does a 1 minute knockout really tell us about a fight? Ultimately, Justin Tafa came out aggressively, caught Parker Porter with a big shot and knocked him out. Doesn't necessarily mean Junior Tafa is going to be able to do that. But what I would say is that Tafa is more technical than his brother, and I mean, he might not have the same raw power, but he's definitely dangerous on the feet. He's a lot faster, he's a lot more technical, and we know that Porter's not the best defensively. He's quite slow, and he doesn't really have a whole lot of power in his hands either. Parker Porter is one of these kind of volume striking heavyweights that breaks you down with pressure, volume, work rate, as opposed to like catching you with these big power shots. And to be fair, Tafa's not a huge power puncher either, but his technique and his speed does make him very dangerous on the feet at heavyweight. So in terms of how these two match up when it comes to striking, I do think Tafa is going to cause Porter some pretty big problems, because he's fast, he's aggressive, he throws a high volume of strikes, he's dangerous. I don't think Porter has really got the power to trouble Tafa. He may catch him with a big shot, knock him out. That can always happen at heavyweight. Generally speaking, Tafa is a significantly better striker than Porter. Now, Porter is tough, he's aggressive, he's got no quit in him. But also we have seen him knocked out in a few fights in the past, and Tafa's, you know, arguably more dangerous than some of the guys that have knocked Porter out. You know, you look at Chris Daukaus, obviously, you know, you look at how Daukaus' career's gone since 2020. You know, Daukaus isn't the most dangerous guy at this stage in his career. And you look at Justin Tafa as well. You know, single shot striker, doesn't throw a particularly high volume, not as fast and technical as Junior. So on the feet is going to be a difficult fight for Parker Porter. But whenever we're breaking down a fight involving the Tafa brothers, we can't ignore the fact that they're absolutely awful on the ground, right? In Junior Tafa's debut against Mohammed Usman, we saw Tafa absolutely light Usman up on the feet and come really, really close to knocking Usman out a few times in that matchup. But Usman stayed alive, he hung in there and was able to drag Tafa to the ground, get on top of him and absolutely dominate him. So whenever we're dealing with a fight involving Junior Tafa, we know that until he improves his ground game, that's going to be a huge potential weakness that all of his opponents could potentially exploit. And we have seen Parker Porter use grappling heavy game plans. He used the grappling heavy game plan to defeat Chase Sherman, and he's not the kind of guy that is a particularly good offensive wrestler or a particularly technical grappler, but he can wrestle, and because he's a big, strong, heavy guy, if he gets on top of you, you know, you're in a lot of trouble. Now, Junior Tafa's not the easiest to take down. You know, his footwork's good, his movement's good, he's athletic, his balance is reasonably good. So Tafa's takedown offense isn't terrible, but he's one of these guys that is at such a low level on the ground that if you do get him down, it's very, very easy to hold him down. So the way that I look at this matchup is Tafa's got a pretty big advantage on the feet. He will likely inflict a lot of damage on Porter if he stays standing and outstrike Porter by a wide margin. But in terms of grappling, Porter's got a huge advantage there. Now, the problem with this fight for Porter is that all fights start standing, and Porter is obviously not the best offensive wrestler. He's a little bit slow, and on top of that, you know, Tafa's not the easiest to get down. You tend to have to be quite persistent with your offensive wrestling, getting very deep on his legs in order to be able to take him down, which, to be fair, Porter isn't particularly good at. So I can understand why Tafa's the favourite here, because fight starts standing, he's got an advantage on the feet, but it's a very, very dangerous fight to bet because both guys have got extreme advantages in the area that the other is weak. Generally, to try and be profitable betting on MMA, what you want to be doing is betting on fighters who don't have any major weaknesses that their opponent could potentially exploit. Whenever you're betting on guys that have weaknesses that their opponent could exploit, you're going to be putting your money in a lot of danger, because we know if you bet on Tafa this weekend and Porter gets him to the ground, he's going to be in a lot of trouble. But if you bet on Porter this weekend and the fight stays standing, Porter's going to be in a lot of trouble. Generally speaking, those are the kind of fights that I want to avoid betting, because no matter which side you go with, your money isn't in a strong position. So I would pass on this one if I were you. It's difficult to say like who my pick is, who my lean is, who I would go with, because like I say, they're both deeply flawed. I guess I would prefer to have money on Porter in this fight, just because he is tough. I know he's been knocked out a couple times, but he is tough. He can take a shot. He's not the easiest to put away. He is persistent. He is aggressive. And we saw that if you can get Tafa down, you know, he's very easy to hold down and control. He also gets more tired as the fight progresses with the more he grapples, which then makes him easier to take down as the fight progresses and easier to hold down as the fight progresses. And as he slows, it also makes him less dangerous on the feet, whereas Porter's actually got a really good gas tank for the division, despite his size, his weight, his appearance, that kind of thing. So I do think this is probably dog or pass, letting the odds do the work for me. I prefer to have money on Porter as the underdog, but I wouldn't bet this fight. I think your money is in a lot of trouble if you bet either of these guys. So if we look at the over, under and the props, we don't actually have odds on the over, under. For some strange reason they haven't loaded. Okay, never mind, we don't have the odds on the over, under. In terms of prop bets, so we don't actually have odds on Tafa to win by knockout or TKO either. You can see only 18 props have loaded. Alright, we'll give props in the over-under a miss on that one because they're not loading. We don't have the full range of them. In fact, it looks like we don't have the full range for a few fights on this card. I'll just refresh one more time. Yeah, they're not published yet, which is really strange. Anyway, okay, never mind about that one. We will just move on. And now, let's break down the fight between Erin Blanchfield and Taila Santos, which I feel is the best fight on this card. And I think that Blanchfield and Santos were a little bit disrespected here, because I think this should have been the main event. It's a #1 contender fight. Whoever wins this, probably going to be fighting for the flyweight title, taking on the winner of the Grasso-Shevchenko rematch. And, you know, both Blanchfield and Santos, high-level female fighters at the top of their game. I feel that this is the true main event on this card. And as you've seen, obviously, if you're a member of my community, we are going to be betting on Taila Santos in this fight. And I do think it is a very good stylistic matchup for her. But before I show you the fight footage to basically highlight why I think Santos is such a good bet in this fight, let's start off by taking a look at the odds. So we can see that Erin Blanchfield is the slight favourite at average odds of around 1.67, which is going to be -149 for an implied probability of 60%. If we take a look at the odds on Taila Santos, she's around an average of 2.25, which is going to be +125 for an implied probability of 44%. Blanchfield is 24 years old, 5'4" with a 68-inch reach. Santos, 30 years old, 5'6" with a 68-inch reach. So no major X factors there to the naked eye, but I do think Taila Santos is likely to be quite a bit more physically imposing than Erin Blanchfield in this fight. I'll show you, examples of why I feel that way when we look at some of the past matchups of both these girls. The only other X factor that I want to highlight on this matchup is that there is potentially some concerning issues around Taila Santos, because if we look at this article here, it was published around a year ago. There's basically been some turmoil in Taila Santos's camp. So what I will do is leave a link to this article below this video where you can read up on it. But basically, Santos's coaches and manager have complained about her not paying them the money that she owes them for various services leading up to certain fights. So they're taking her to court in Brazil. There's like a lawsuit. Now, this was a year ago, so I don't know if this is resolved now. I don't know if it's still ongoing. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's false. And I don't know what the impact of this is on Taila Santos's training and preparation for this fight. Because if we look at Santos's record, she hasn't fought in just over a year. So she hasn't fought since all this stuff kind of kicked off. And if you go to Taila Santos's Instagram, she just isn't active online at all. This was her last post 6 weeks ago, just a generic promotional poster, and not really saying anything in particular here, just confirming that she's going to be fighting on this card. And then, if you look at this post, there's a picture of her with her daughter. There's this post again with her husband, I believe. There's just not a lot of information on her profile in terms of training. Again, this is her with her husband, 2 weeks ago. 19 weeks ago she's in a gym. 19 weeks ago she's in a gym, but we don't really know what gym she's training at, where she is. Aside from like pictures with her husband and her daughter, there's no real information on where Taila Santos is training at the moment, what her training's like, which coaches she's working with. So if you know more about that, if you know what Taila Santos has been up to, please let me know in the comments below or in our Discord. Because to be honest with you, this is one of those fights where when I research it and look at how they both match up from a stylistic point of view, as much as I think Erin Blanchfield is brilliant and she's got a huge future in the sport, and I love everything about Erin Blanchfield, the odds don't make a whole lot of sense for me here, because when you just look at their past performances, this is a really good stylistic matchup for Taila Santos. And so, if I'm being brutally honest, the issues around Taila Santos's team and her potentially bad preparation for this fight is really one of my only concerns with this bet. Is really one of the only risk factors that I can identify, which is a pretty big risk factor, right? Because if Santos had a team that helped her prepare to look as good as she has over the last few years, and now she doesn't have those same people by her side, will she look as good this weekend? There's no way to know. It is one of those things that, we're just not going to know the answer to, I guess, unless you have answers for me. I would appreciate if you could share them with me. But ultimately, what I always say in these situations is you'll never find any bet without any risk factors ever. If you ever think you've found a bet without risk factors, all that says to me is you haven't researched it properly. So this can't be ignored. This is a risk factor. This is an issue. This makes it risky to bet on Taila Santos, but every bet is risky, and there's a lot more reasons why betting Erin Blanchfield would be even more risky this weekend, which we'll obviously get into and show you in the footage. So let's talk about how these two match up from a stylistic point of view before we get into watching some footage. Now, of course, this is a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Taila Santos has got a base in Muay Thai, and Erin Blanchfield is predominantly a grappler. So this fight, for the most part, is going to come down to whether Erin Blanchfield can get Taila Santos to the ground and keep her on the ground for long enough to win the fight. I've seen a few people this week talk about Erin Blanchfield's high volume, aggressive striking. I'm not sure where that comes from, but a lot of people that I see online are kind of assuming that Blanchfield could be competitive with Taila Santos on the feet. I don't want to focus on that in this breakdown video, or this breakdown is going to get really long. But what I would say is I am like 80 to 90% confident that if this fight stays standing, Blanchfield is going to get absolutely smoked. I don't think it will be a contest. Blanchfield's path to victory in this fight is on the ground. She's going to need to get Taila Santos to the ground. And if she can get Santos to the ground, she could cause Santos a lot of problems. But if this fight stays standing, Blanchfield is more than likely going to be in a lot of trouble. And like I say, I don't want to make this breakdown video super long. But if you want to basically see for yourself the reasons why, go watch Blanchfield's fight against Jessica Andrade, JJ Aldrich, and just look at how bad her striking defense was, how much damage she took, how difficult she found it to read both Andrade and Aldrich on the feet. So if it does stay standing, Santos is faster, more technical, she hits harder, she's nasty in the clinch, she's better defensively, she's better at reading her opponents. Santos is going to have a hell of a lot of success in this fight if it stays standing. And I believe there's a pretty good chance that it will stay standing, because Santos' takedown defense is reasonably good. She also does a reasonably good job of working her way back up to her feet. And Erin Blanchfield's offensive wrestling isn't great. And I'm going to show you some footage to back that up. I think in time, Erin Blanchfield's offensive wrestling will become great. And it might even become great this weekend, right? Another big risk factor with betting against young, hungry, up-and-coming, talented fighters like Blanchfield, who are only 24 years old, is that they are going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. From what I've seen, based on Blanchfield's past fights, her offensive wrestling, based on past fights, will make it very difficult for her to take Taila Santos down and hold her down. But that doesn't mean it can't improve. What I do like about Blanchfield is that she has a very good body type to be a good offensive wrestler, because she's got that small, compact, low center of gravity, which means when she shoots in on her opponents, if she improves her technique a little bit, she can shoot really deep on their legs and hips, which will make her a much more effective offensive wrestler. At the moment, based on the footage I'll show you, that's not the case. Her takedown entries come way too high up above her opponent's hips, making her relatively ineffective. And so I understand a lot of people think Blanchfield is an amazing wrestler. She isn't. She's a very good grappler when she gets you down, but she isn't particularly good at getting you down. And I will show you footage of that to kind of back that point up, as well as some clips of Taila Santos' takedown offense, so everyone understands the reason why I think Santos is a pretty good bet in this fight. So let's actually just jump into taking a look at the footage, because the only place that you'll find truth and honesty in this game is the fight footage. Everyone's going to have an opinion on this fight, but most people are working from hazy memories. They won't actually have done research. So the first fight that we're going to take a look at is the fight between Erin Blanchfield and Jessica Andrade, which is obviously Blanchfield's last fight, so it's absolutely perfect to watch, because it gives us the closest indicator of what to expect from Blanchfield this weekend. So we also need to preface this by understanding what is in front of Blanchfield here. So Jessica Andrade has pretty bad takedown defense and a pretty low level ground game. If you look at what Shevchenko did to her on the ground, what Blanchfield's done to her on the ground, if you go earlier, further back in Andrade's career, she's one of these fighters that is very physically imposing, powerful and strong on the feet, but for some reason she's very, very physically weak on the ground. And so Andrade is pretty easy to take down and hold down, a lot easier than Taila Santos. What I like about researching matchups like this is that we can use certain fighters as kind of like measuring sticks, or like a gauge to assess the level of someone's offensive wrestling. So the way that I would work this out is Taila Santos's takedown defense and ground game and her ability to work her way back up is significantly better than Jessica Andrade's. Andrade is a lot easier to take down and hold down than Taila Santos. So if Erin Blanchfield is struggling to take down and hold down Jessica Andrade, she's likely to struggle even more against Taila Santos. Apologies for that. I'll close my emails now. They shouldn't be open, but we'll get rid of that, stop it happening again. So yeah, let's get into the fight footage. So again, I don't want to make this breakdown super long, so we're not going to focus on the striking. I think most people that have researched this fight will be in agreement that Blanchfield's in a lot of trouble if it stays on the feet. So let's just focus on the grappling. So what I want you to pay attention to is the offensive wrestling technique of Blanchfield in this matchup. So there we go, first attempt there. So she's taking a lot of damage early, coming under a lot of pressure, and what I want you to pay attention to here is the height at which Blanchfield is shooting a takedown. So watch, it comes here in just a second. We can actually slow it down. Watch as she shoots. There we go. So look at the height of Blanchfield, right? Very, very high up above the legs and hips of Andrade. We know that to, you know, the highest probability kind of double leg or single leg that you're going to get is when you shoot in really deep on your opponent's legs and hips. Because if you want to knock something over, you think about a Jenga tower, right? The game of Jenga. What's the quickest way for a Jenga tower to topple over, right? You remove the pieces at the very bottom, remove the pieces at the base. Offensive wrestling's the exact same. If you want to give yourself the best chance of taking your opponent down, you shoot in deep on their legs and hips, which is something Blanchfield just doesn't do. Now, she's 24 years old. She's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. She has struggled to take down Jessica Andrade and JJ Aldrich now, who are two pretty decent strikers. I'm sure she's working very hard on her offensive wrestling. Maybe she'll get in a lot deeper on the legs and hips of Santos than she has on Andrade and Aldrich. It will be easier to get in deeper on the legs and hips of Santos than Aldrich and Andrade because Santos is taller. So naturally, if you've got a lower center of gravity and you're shooting in on a taller opponent, you'll naturally get in deeper on their legs and hips. But like I say, Santos's takedown offense is an order of magnitude better than Jessica Andrade's. So there's lots of layers to this very, very complex fight. So that was the first example of where Blanchfield shoots way too high above the legs and hips to get a takedown. There's another example shortly after. So again, look at the height at which she shoots in. So there we go. Look at this position. She comes forward. Again, nowhere near the legs and hips. She just looks to get to the body lock, drive Andrade into the cage. But the problem is, in these positions, she just isn't the most physically imposing. So it's not like she can drive her opponents into the cage on a body lock and just ragdoll them to the ground. Because she can't do that, because she has to start working for inside trips, outside trips, and to try and get lower in on the legs and hips from these clinch positions, she gives her opponents time to react and fight for underhooks, which is what you see Andrade do here. She's got an underhook on the right side, overhook on the left side, and she's going to be able to use that to stuff this takedown pretty easily. Now, what I want you to do in these positions is pay close attention to the physicality of Blanchfield in these positions, because physicality has a huge impact on mixed martial arts contests, and in women's MMA in particular. If you think about some of the most dominant female fighters in history, what do they all have in common? Well, who are the most dominant female fighters in UFC history, right? You've got Cyborg, you've got Amanda Nunes, and you've got Valentina Shevchenko. You've also got Ronda Rousey, right? She had a very long winning streak. But Ronda Rousey is kind of the outlier in that group, and she of course ran into problems when she faced Amanda Nunes. Now, what do Nunes, Cyborg, and Valentina Shevchenko all have in common? They're all extremely physically imposing and athletic relative to most girls in that division. When you look at Amanda Nunes fighting, you know, Misha Tate, or Amanda Nunes fighting Juliana Pena, or you look at Valentina Shevchenko fighting, Lauren Murphy, or Valentina Shevchenko fighting Caitlin Chukadze. There is a massive difference in physicality and athleticism. And so physicality and athleticism does play a part in, all levels of MMA, all weight classes, men, women, everything, right? But physicality and athleticism has a particularly big impact on women's MMA. And female fighters that are more athletic, more powerful, more physically imposing tend to have a pretty big edge. And Blanchfield's problem, from what I can see, is that she just doesn't have a whole lot of physicality to her game, which is completely and utterly understandable because she's only 25 years old. Her body, from an athletic point of view, is still developing, and she's just at a very early stage in her career where she's not quite there yet. She doesn't have that much physicality to her game. She's not the most physically imposing fighter, and we'll see that in this footage that we're going to watch. Compare that to Taila Santos. Look at her upper body. Big, muscular, strong, athletic, physically imposing, good balance. She hits hard. She's 30 years old. Her body is developed athletically. She's got a strong, muscular frame. She's very powerful. She's very physically imposing. And that's why she's 19-2. I'm sure Taila Santos has fought tons of girls throughout her career that are more skilled than her, but they're not able to deal with her power, her physicality, and her athleticism. So what I want you to do in these first positions we're going to watch Blanchfield in is just pay attention to the lack of physicality in Blanchfield's grappling, clinch game, offensive wrestling, so that when we go and watch Taila Santos, you'll see a big difference in physicality, which is very important, very notable in women's MMA. I will remind you, our win rate on pre-fight women's MMA is 70%. We win 70% of the bets we place on women's MMA. We have a really, really big edge when it comes to betting women's MMA, and understanding concepts such as this is the reason why we have a big edge. I don't know if Taila Santos is going to win this weekend. I have absolutely no idea. What I do know is this is a bad stylistic matchup for Erin Blanchfield. Let's keep going. So look, in this position, remember, Andrade is only 5'3", not particularly physically imposing in grappling positions. Blanchfield gets nowhere near the takedown there. An overhook and an underhook completely slams the door in Blanchfield's face. So we'll keep it going. Look for more examples. There are plenty, fortunately, which makes, researching this fight quite easy. Even though the fight didn't last very long, we had a lot to work with. And you can see for a few minutes now, after those first two takedown attempts from Blanchfield, she kind of accepts that she's not going to be able to get the fight to the ground. And so just kind of stands and bangs with Andrade for a little while. And again, this is one of the reasons why, again, this is a tough stylistic match for Blanchfield, because she doesn't really have the striking to set her takedowns up. This fight shows it. She realizes pretty early on in this first round that she's not going to be able to get Andrade down unless she sets the takedowns up, because when she's coming forward, Andrade is, look, there's another one. Look at the position of Blanchfield, way too high above the legs and hips. Look at the position of her arms. Look, way too high up above the arms and hips, the legs and hips. And look at how much space there is to get underhooks in there. Andrade just shrugs her off. But anyway, Blanchfield realizes that she needs to start trying to set the takedowns up. So she starts to stand and bang. And just is not effective. Is pretty bad defensively. Doesn't have any power in her hands, any pop in her shots. And she's very, very predictable when she comes forward looking for the takedown. So we'll keep skipping through. We'll look for some more examples. Do we have any more in this round? Again, even here, right? Way too high up above the legs and hips. Way too high. Look at this. Way too high above the legs and hips. Way too high. Look, she's going for a Muay Thai clinch. It's just... we're 4.5 minutes in, and Blanchfield hasn't shot a takedown below hip height once yet. Here's another one. Look how high up above the hip she is. Watch. Look at this. And what she's trying to do, because she can't get in on the legs and hips, she's trying to get to the body lock and drive Andrade into the cage so that she can then start to drop lower and start working with single legs or double legs, or from the body lock she's going to be looking for inside trips and outside trips. It's not an easy thing to do though on someone as big, strong, with as good a balance as Taila Santos has got, because remember, what is Santos' base? It's Muay Thai. You know, you think about Muay Thai fighters, female Muay Thai fighters over the years, fighters like Germaine de Randamie. A fighter like Germaine de Randamie, if you shot in deep on her legs and hips out in the middle of the octagon, very, very bad takedown defense. But if you tried to take de Randamie down against the cage from the clinch off body locks and trips, it's virtually impossible, because Muay Thai fighters are so comfortable in this position with their balance, their overhooks, fighting for underhooks. It's very, very difficult to get them down. And look at this, just one underhook on that right side for Andrade. And you can see Blanchfield is just having a world of trouble trying to upset her balance. And remember, Taila Santos' takedown defense, ground game, balance, everything, significantly better than Andrade's. I mean, look at this. Andrade just digs an underhook on this right side, and Blanchfield can't get past it. Underhook on the right side, can't get past it. Can't drop down, no physicality at all to her grappling. Just not great, if I'm honest with you. Not great. And I love Blanchfield. She's a young, hungry, talented, up-and-coming fighter. But this ain't the best stylistic matchup for her based on what I've seen. We come with receipts, boys. When we place bets, we come with receipts. You should know me by now. This is how we make profit betting MMA. We do the research. We know what the fuck we're talking about. We come with receipts. So here, Blanchfield gets the kind of takedown that she looks for, right? So again, what the irony of this is actually the deepest takedown that Blanchfield has shot this fight, because you can see Andrade is throwing a kick and she's changed levels as the kick is being thrown. So Andrade is like upright, rigid, off balance. So as Blanchfield shoots, you can see briefly there her hands were actually underneath the hips of Andrade for the first time, right? The irony of this position here is that Andrade actually stuffs the initial entry, shows her strong hips, and again Blanchfield is forced to go up way too high above Andrade's hips. And the irony is, you know, Andrade has stuffed this takedown here, but then Blanchfield goes for the inside trip, gets it, and then this is where Blanchfield does her best work. She's great on the ground. You know, heavy top game, nasty submission grappler, very aggressive on the ground. Blanchfield's brilliant on the ground. You know, there's no doubt that if Blanchfield gets Santos down, Santos is going to be in a lot of trouble. But it's no good having a ground game like this if you can't get your opponent down, right? So what we're going to do now is take a look at Blanchfield's fight against JJ Aldrich, which was about a year ago. And I will also preface this fight by saying Aldrich's takedown, defense, and ground game isn't as good as Taila Santos's, but it is better than Jessica Andrade's. Jessica Andrade's takedown defense and ground game is particularly bad, and it's been an issue for her, you know, for a really long time, right, in her career. So anyway, again, what you're paying attention to here is the type of takedowns that Blanchfield attempts. What you're also looking at is the physicality of Blanchfield in grappling positions, not when they get to the ground, but actually working for takedowns in the clinch from open grappling positions. So here we can see pretty early on, Blanchfield catches a kick and trips Blanchfield. Very, very nice. If we keep going, this was actually it is really interesting, but this was actually a bit of a lucky win for Blanchfield. She got outstruck big time in the first round, was struggling very bad, didn't get anywhere near a takedown in this fight, and then kind of hit a Hail Mary submission out of nowhere in round 2. I actually felt pretty bad for Aldrich. Had she not snatched that Hail Mary submission out of nowhere, I'm pretty sure that Blanchfield would have lost this fight. And it's interesting, right, how one fight can, you know, completely alter your path. If Blanchfield loses this fight, I seriously doubt that she would be fighting in a #1 contender fight on the main card this weekend. The irony is, Aldrich came so close to beating Blanchfield, lost due to a bit of bad luck getting caught in a bad position, and now she's buried on the Fight Pass prelims while Blanchfield's in a #1 contender fight. I mean, Aldrich wouldn't beat Taila Santos anyway, so it's irrelevant. Styles make fights, and you know, Blanchfield has a much better chance of beating Taila Santos than Aldrich does. But, you know, it's just interesting how one fight can, you know, alter the course of a fighter's career for years. You see just little sequences like this as well. Blanchfield just doesn't read her opponents very well. Eats a stiff jab here. And I don't want to be critical of Aldrich at all, because she's brilliant. She's, you know, probably going to be a champion at some point in her career. She's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. She's brilliant. I love Blanchfield. But at 24 years old, can't help but feel this matchup might be too much too soon, and she just isn't quite there yet. I think her lack of physicality in grappling positions is going to make it more difficult for her to compete with the more athletic, physically imposing, powerful flyweights in the division. So anyway, takedown attempt here from Blanchfield, first of the fight, 2 minutes in. And again, what do we notice about this? Above hip height. So she's trying to drive Aldrich into the cage where she can start to work for inside trips, outside trips, all that kind of stuff. We know this is unless you're an absolute athletic freak that can just fucking get to a high crotch single leg, pick your opponent up, dump him to the ground. It's very, very difficult to get past underhooks and overhooks, right? So you can see a nice deep overhook from Aldrich here. Decent balance, decent base, using the cage as a tool to defend the takedown, and Blanchfield just can't get past it. She just doesn't have the strength or physicality to just power through the overhook. And just pay attention to how physically weak, and here we Blanchfield looks in this position. Again, this is where I mentioned the high crotch single leg. Some guys, if they can't get past an overhook, will just drop down, connect their hands together on a high crotch single leg, just fucking lift their opponent up in the ground and dump them on the ground, right? Blanchfield doesn't have the power, the physicality, the athleticism to do that, and you can see that here. Aldrich is so comfortable in this position. Wide base, one overhook. I mean, she's so comfortable, she's not even bothering with an underhook on the left side. Very, very, very comfortable in this position. And these positions are really important for when we go look at footage of Taila Santos, and then Blanchfield realizes she's not going to get it, disengages from this position. So we're not focusing on the striking, because we accept, or most of us would accept, that Santos has a pretty big advantage there. And Aldrich looks for a little double leg there. In fact, the irony is that double leg from Aldrich was better than any takedown attempt we've seen from Blanchfield. And because of that, she gets the takedown. What have we been saying the whole video, guys? If you get in deep on the legs and hips of your opponent, you significantly increase the probability of getting the takedown. Why hasn't Blanchfield been able to take Andrade or Aldrich down? Because she keeps shooting above hip height. What happens the first time Aldrich shoots below hip height? What happens? She gets the fucking takedown. Look at the position of her hand. Watch. Boom. Look at her hands. Below hip height. Significantly increases the probability of getting the takedown. So guess what? She gets it. She's in deep on the body. Gets the outside trip. Boom. Easy takedown. And I wouldn't rule out Taila Santos being able to outgrapple Blanchfield. I'll just throw that out there. Anyway. If Blanchfield was shooting takedowns that deep, I wouldn't be anywhere near as confident as on Taila Santos this weekend, but she doesn't. Doesn't mean she can't. Doesn't mean she can't improve. Doesn't mean she can't show up with significantly better offensive wrestling than she has in the past. But based on these fights, we're not seeing it. And if we're not seeing it, we can't fucking bet on it. All we can do is make the best decision possible with the information we've got available. That was the deepest takedown attempt I think I've ever seen from Blanchfield. Nice single leg, but the problem with this one is that she doesn't have the physicality to upset the balance of Aldrich. Just isn't strong, isn't physically imposing, but she's 24 years old. That can come in time. It's not there yet. Maybe it'll come this weekend, but this fight was only a year ago. You wouldn't expect a whole lot to have changed. So yes, Blanchfield, not the best offensive wrestler, no physicality or athleticism to her game at all. Great technique. To some extent, I would like to see her take down entries below hip height. But yes, there's a lot that the Blanchfield needs to work on. So Aldrich fancying herself in these positions now again gets an easy takedown. You know, Aldrich is having more success in grappling than Blanchfield is. This is why fight research is so important. The way people talk about Erin Blanchfield is like she's like some kind of fucking female Khabib or something. It's like, oh, for fuck's sake, the footage is the only place you'll find truth and honesty in this game. I don't know how many times I have to say this. The footage is the only place you will find truth and honesty. So Blanchfield struggling really bad in this fight. Aldrich cruising on the feet, cruising in grappling positions, and then out of nowhere, you know, gets her leg swept. Blanchfield jumps on this submission here and literally out of nowhere is able to submit Aldrich. Very, very, very brutally unlucky loss for Aldrich, because she was well on her way to winning a decision before that. But this is a game of inches at the highest level of sports. There are fine margins to separate winning and losing, and that fight was a very good example because Blanchfield was struggling extremely badly. So we've taken a look at the offensive wrestling of Blanchfield, her physicality, her athleticism. Now what we need to do is take a look at the balance, the physicality, the athleticism of Santos, her takedown defense. And we'll start off by looking at her last fight from about a year ago against Valentina Shevchenko. Now I'll even go out on a limb and say I think Shevchenko is a better offensive wrestler than Erin Blanchfield. Predominantly because Shevchenko is much more physically imposing, much more athletic than Erin Blanchfield. So you could argue, you know, that Blanchfield might have the better technical MMA grappling, but Shevchenko's athleticism in grappling positions makes her a more difficult challenge for someone like Taila Santos in grappling positions than Erin Blanchfield. Because against Erin Blanchfield, we know Taila Santos is going to have an abundance of athleticism and physicality. She doesn't have that over Shevchenko because Shevchenko is just as strong, just as physically imposing as Santos. So against someone like Shevchenko, Santos needs to rely on her technique much more than her athleticism and physicality. When we watch footage of Santos against Roxanne Modafferi, that is where, because Santos is a lot more physically imposing and athletic than Roxanne, she can rely a lot more on that athleticism being more physically imposing. You probably didn't understand the word of that, it was a little bit long-winded, but hopefully some of you are following along. But anyway, here we go. So this is the first takedown that Santos has to deal with. Shevchenko gets in on a similar sort of entry really to what you'd see Blanchfield attempt. Similar sort of height on the body lock. She puts Santos against the cage. So what you want to be looking at in this position is the physicality and the balance of Santos, right? And you want to be visualizing how much success Blanchfield is going to have in a position like this, dropping down from the body lock and getting on the legs and hips of Santos, how much success Blanchfield might have with her inside-outside trips, and how much success she'll have moving Santos around in this position. A couple of things to pay attention to. The base and the balance of Santos. Big old thick legs, athletic frame, wide base. Compare this to the likes of Jessica Andrade, JJ Aldrich. So Santos has got this overhook on the left side. Also pay attention to the physicality of Shevchenko in these positions versus the physicality of Blanchfield in these positions. So overhook, deep overhook on the left side. Santos fighting for an underhook on the right side. So we're not seeing Shevchenko attempt any inside-outside trips or anything like that from this position. But what we are seeing is Santos relatively comfortable in this position. Again, look at the big old muscles in the upper body of Taila Santos. You don't see any of this from Erin Blanchfield, and that matters. It will matter in positions like this that Blanchfield is going to need to work from to get takedowns, because you can't match the physicality of Santos. It's going to be difficult to shift Santos's body weight and upset her balance with those body lock inside trips, outside trips. So you can see very, very tight body lock here from Shevchenko. Santos relying on her balance basically to not get taken down here, and we just skip through. You can see there Shevchenko tries to shift Santos's body weight, but Santos again, and this is where physicality, size, strength, balance comes in. Shevchenko is a big, strong, powerful, physically imposing girl, a lot more physically imposing than Blanchfield. She tries to upset, Santos's balance off this deep body lock. But Santos is just too big and strong, so she ends up in top position. Now what I want you to pay attention to is Santos' effectiveness in these positions. Look how she goes to wrist control to stop Shevchenko from posting and working her way back up to her feet. Look how quick the back take was. People are assuming in this fight that Blanchfield has got some kind of huge advantage over Taila Santos in the ground. I will say right now, I wouldn't be surprised if this is one of those fights where Blanchfield just gets overwhelmed and she gets outstruck on the feet and out-grappled on the ground. Because no matter how good you think Blanchfield's grappling technique is, physicality is a big fucking deal in women's MMA. And Santos could just overpower, outmuscle, and big sister her on the ground. If we just get into this second round now, so we can see here, Santos puts Shevchenko into the clinch, gets the Muay Thai clinch, and just look at the difference in physicality. Like, visualize now. We've seen Blanchfield in this position against Aldrich and Drage. You're seeing Santos in this position. Look at her legs. Look at her frame. How muscular she is, how strong she is in these positions. It's going to be very difficult for Blanchfield to have success with her grappling when she's dealing with a female fighter, a female opponent as physically imposing as this. So you can see Santos in on a body lock here. And we can just skip through because we're focusing on Santos' takedown offense, obviously. But here she gets a nice outside trip. When you look at the takedowns that JJ Aldrich was able to hit on Blanchfield, tell me Santos isn't going to be able to do the same. How do we know Santos isn't going to come in with a grappling heavy game plan, feel very confident in her physicality, and just ragdoll Blanchfield to the ground and big sister her? I'm not saying that's the most likely outcome. You want to see Santos keep this fight on the feet. But I don't think the skill gap on the ground is as big as a lot of people believe it is. I mean, we know Shevchenko's pretty weak off her back, so Santos able to hold her down. Now, this position is very interesting. You don't see Erin Blanchfield attempt judo throws. So this position, this takedown attempt, isn't particularly relative in the context of this fight. But what is relative is how Santos reacts when she hits the ground. So remember what we talk about all the time in terms of what you want to see fighters do when they first get taken down. You want to see them immediately explode to life, right? And as soon as they hit the ground, immediately try and scramble back up to their feet. Look at what Taila Santos does here. So as she gets taken down off this judo throw, look at this. She immediately gets to her knees and starts scrambling out of trouble in the top position. Again, I understand Erin Blanchfield is a fantastically technical skilled grappler, but can she match the physicality? When she hits takedowns on Santos, and someone as big and strong as Santos starts to scramble, can Blanchfield match it and win the scrambles? It's not about, like, obviously technique plays some part in, you know, grappling positions. But size, strength, physicality also plays a big part. And if Santos is winning scrambles against one of the most physically imposing athletic female fighters in the history of the sport, Valentina Shevchenko, you're telling me she can't win scrambles against Blanchfield as well? Come on, man. Come on. So anyway, let's get into this third round. Again, we're not focusing on striking. Most of us would agree Santos has the advantage there. Scrolling through. Here we go, grappling position here. Sorry guys, just checking the audio and everything was good. So let me just, there we go, here's another example, right? So Shevchenko gets in on a nice deep body lock, hits a nice outside trip, and then look again. Santos just able to just literally roll Shevchenko over and stand back up. It's pretty notable, guys. It's pretty notable to me. And again, here you can see Santos hits the outside trip off a body lock. And again, very slick back take. So anyway, we can watch one more fight. Although I was just checking the time on the video. It's getting pretty long. So I would like to start wrapping this breakdown video up, but I like to cross the T's and dot the I's. Very important on a fight like this, because I see so many people tossing out opinions on this fight, which I believe are inaccurate. I think a lot of people believe Blanchfield's grappling is a lot better than it is. I think a lot of people believe Santos's takedown defense and ground game is a lot worse than it is. So what is very interesting about the fight between Taila Santos and Roxanne Modafferi is that Roxanne Modafferi's style of offensive wrestling is actually very similar to Erin Blanchfield's, where almost all of Modafferi's takedown attempts come from the body lock in the clinch, from inside trips, outside trips. What is particularly interesting about Roxanne is that for all of her weaknesses, we all know that on the feet she was extremely low level. There's a lot of issues with Roxanne's game, right? But the one thing that Roxanne had, which enabled her to pick up wins every once in a while in the UFC and have such a long career, is that Roxanne was a very physically imposing grappler in the positions that she specialized in. So I'm not talking about Roxanne being physically imposing in all areas. I mean in her areas of expertise, right? In terms of the clinch, the body lock, inside trips, outside trips. Roxanne was very physically imposing in these positions. I'd even go as far as saying more physically imposing in those positions than Blanchfield. Now, a lot of people will laugh and joke and disagree with me on that, but there's a reason why Modafferi was able to stick around in the UFC for such a long time with such a limited skill set. She was very, very, very effective at one particular thing, which was body locks, clinches, top game. And because of that, when you see someone like Taila Santos have so much success completely neutralizing the threat of Roxanne from the clinch, in body lock takedown positions off the inside trip, outside trip, it does speak volumes for what Santos is capable of. Because Roxanne's one of these memed fighters, because again you see her give up a cheap takedown there, her striking defense is really bad, but like I say, Roxanne was good at that one thing, which was inside trips, outside trips off the body lock in the clinch position. Here, this is where she was at her best, right? In this one position, I think she's more physically imposing than Blanchfield. If you look at the way Roxanne moves in these positions, she's a lot more difficult to deal with than Blanchfield, in my opinion. If you look at Blanchfield against Andrade and Aldrich, and you look at Roxanne's body of work from this position throughout her career, and yet in Roxanne's area of speciality, Santos just handles her. Again, hits an outside trip off the body lock, but Roxanne immediately scrambles back up to her feet. And one thing you'll notice about Roxanne in these positions as well, she's a lot more persistent with the grappling. You look at her, she's constantly trying to hit outside trips, inside trips, tangling the legs up. She's always working. She's very, very strong in this position. And so a lot of the time when we're breaking down fights like this and trying to predict the outcome, it's understanding what you're dealing with. Because a lot of people will look at Roxanne Modafferi and they'll be like, she's an awful fighter, she's low level, a win over her means absolutely nothing. But when you truly understand what Roxanne is good at, what her strengths are, it enables you to interpret the struggle that someone like Blanchfield might have. Like, look at the difference between the physical. Look at the difference between the physically imposing element of this high crotch single leg from Roxanne versus the high crotch single leg that Blanchfield tried to hit on Aldrich. Like, it's not comparable. It really isn't comparable. Look at this. Look at how hard Roxanne's committing to this. She's just way stronger in these positions, and yet isn't getting anywhere near a takedown. Santos is totally handling her. And I think this Roxanne Modafferi fight gives us a little bit of a clue as to what the clinch position is going to look like for Blanchfield, where I see Santos just neutralizing the threat of the takedown and just hammering Blanchfield with knees to the body, elbows on the inside. So here we go, more takedown defense. Single leg takedown entry from Roxanne, and again, this is a very interesting position because we don't see Blanchfield shoot takedowns below hip height. So here we get to see a little bit of the balance of Santos. So Roxanne shoots a single leg, and Santos just uses her balance to hop over to the cage, where she's able to use the cage to base defend the takedown. And again, just look at the strength of Santos in these positions. Very, very impressive. And Roxanne's trying to upset the balance off that single leg, but she can't. Santos's balance is too good. And again, just look at the persistence of Roxanne, right? Roxanne is working hard for the takedowns. She's constantly spamming these body lock, clinch takedown attempts, constantly trying to tie up the legs of Santos with inside trips, outside trips. Blanchfield doesn't persist with grappling this hard. You know, she'll shoot 1, 2, maybe 3 takedowns a fight, but she's not committing as hard as Roxanne is, and I really strongly feel she's not as physically imposing as Roxanne in these positions either. I mean, Roxanne is strong here. I mean, Roxanne is moving Santos around more in this position than Shevchenko was. Like I say, Roxanne, very low-level fighter, but she built a career off this one position, and she was effective at this one position. We're kind of seeing that here in the difference between Santos struggling here against Roxanne versus Shevchenko. So you can just see, just isn't able to upset the balance of Santos. Santos is dealing with everything, completely neutralizing the threat of the takedown. And then look what happens out in kickboxing range. That's where Santos can do her best work. She eventually gets a takedown. She loves those outside trips off the body lock. So anyway, like, this breakdown's getting really long. I think I've made my point. By the third round, Roxanne's tired, hurt. Watching the third round isn't going to benefit us that much. So like I always say, I don't know what the hell's going to happen in this fight. All we can do is make the best decision possible with the information we've got available. Based on their past fights, this is a brilliant stylistic matchup for Taila Santos. The risk factors are Santos' turmoil with her team and training camp, and Blanchfield making big improvements from fight to fight. But I absolutely love Taila Santos in this fight because I feel she's the significantly better striker out of the two. I think it's going to be very difficult for Blanchfield to get this fight to the ground. If she does get Santos down, I think it'll be very difficult for her to hold Santos down. And the cherry on top of the cake is, I have a sneaky feeling that Santos is actually the better MMA grappler. Not because she has better technique than Blanchfield, but because size, strength, power and physicality matters in women's MMA. And we see that time and time again in women's MMA, and Santos certainly has the edge there. So I think Santos is a great bet this weekend, and you know, it's not a super confident bet, but at underdog odds, Santos is an absolute no fucking brainer if you've done your homework on this fight. So anyway, hit me up in Discord, let me know what you think, leave a comment below, let me know what you think if you're watching on YouTube. And yeah, let's get into the over-under. So both girls are pretty tough. Both are pretty difficult to put away. If you look at Santos' record, she is a decisionator. I don't think she's ever been finished. No, she's never been finished. She's lost 2 decisions against one of the best female fighters ever, and her debut where she looked absolutely awful. Her ground game looked awful in that fight, but she has improved a lot since her debut against Mara Romero Barrella. Whatever happened to her? She must have got released. Anyway, so Santos has never been finished. Blanchfield, tough as nails as well. Not easy to put Blanchfield away. And we know Santos isn't that dangerous. She does have a couple of finishes here and there over fighters like Joanne Wood, but we know Blanchfield very tough. So very likely the fight goes to a decision. The odds reflect that. They're not very good. I wouldn't bet that. The odds are too steep. I also wouldn't bet on the fight not to go to a decision. So I think it's very, 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 very likely this fight goes the distance. In terms of props, the only one that I would consider is Taila Santos by decision, but the odds are absolutely terrible. And you know what? The odds on Santos by decision aren't that much better than her money line to win straight. So I wouldn't bother with the props there. If you really, really want to bet this fight, I would take Santos straight. And that is what I'm going to be doing. So I hope you found that useful. Alright, if you're liking these breakdown videos, you appreciate these breakdown videos, please hit the like button below. Remember, if this video gets 200 likes, we'll do a live stream as a group researching that fight between Sergey Spivak, Cyril Gane next weekend. And now, let's break down the fight between Rinya Nakamura and Fernie Garcia. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Nakamura is a massive favourite at average odds of around 1.13, which is going to be minus 769 for an implied probability of 89%. We take a look at the odds on Garcia. He's around an average of 6.50, which is going to be plus 550 for an implied probability of 15%. So Nakamura, 28 years old, 5'7", 68-inch reach. Fernie Garcia, 31 years old, 5'7", 67-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size. Nothing major going on there. So let's talk about how these two match up from a stylistic point of view. Now, I do think Nakamura is very good, and I do think this is a very difficult stylistic matchup for Fernie Garcia. The odds are a little bit wild on this one for me, with Nakamura being such a big favourite, but I do agree that he should be favoured in this matchup. When you look at his record though, obviously he is relatively untested. He's been facing a pretty low level of opponent, and you know, he's run through pretty much everyone that he's ever fought very, very quickly. I really like Nakamura. I think he's a very skilled, very dangerous fighter everywhere, but his style will get him into trouble at some point. Because if we consider how these two match up when it comes to striking and grappling, Nakamura is just very reckless, and he's one of these guys that sprints and redlines it from the first second of the fight to the last. And because he hasn't gone the distance very often, or faced a particularly high level of opponent, or gone up against guys that can kind of weather that early storm, we don't really know how Nakamura is going to perform into the second and third round. Fernie Garcia is a tough, durable Mexican. He's the kind of guy that could weather the early storm. So where the odds get a little bit crazy for me on this one is, while, you know, Garcia is probably going to struggle pretty bad early on, how does this fight look in the second and third round if Nakamura doesn't get another quick finish? So if we consider, you know, how they look on the feet, Garcia's more of a volume striker. You know, he's very technical, decent kickboxer, likes to chip away at you on the feet. Nakamura, very aggressive, very powerful, and the kind of guy that likes to come forward, take control of the center of the octagon, and punch your head off your shoulders. He is super, super, super aggressive. The problem with Nakamura is that he's also very reckless. He stands right in front of his opponents and wants to stand and bang. Doesn't move his head much, just loads up on big winging power shots to try and knock him out. Now, that has worked really well for him up until this point in his career. He's 7-0. But at some point, he's going to face someone that can stand their ground, fire back, counter, and punish him for how bad he is defensively. Hasn't fought anyone like that yet. Fernie Garcia isn't the most powerful striker, doesn't have much power in his hands, he's not the most dangerous striker, so maybe Fernie Garcia isn't the guy to punish Nakamura either, but it only takes one shot, and it's only a matter of time before someone makes Nakamura pay for being overly aggressive and reckless. This guy's style of striking is unsustainable, and it will catch up with him. I don't know if it's going to be Fernie Garcia, but he can't continue to fight how he fights without getting brutally KO'd at some point in the near future. So on the feet, this is one of those matchups where it's going to be difficult for Fernie Garcia, because Nakamura is one of these guys that just comes forward and overwhelms you with his power, his physicality, his aggression. And Garcia doesn't really have the footwork, the movement, the counter-striking, the power in his hands to deal with that, but it doesn't mean Fernie can't weather the early storm, drag Nakamura into the second and third rounds and take over, or catch Nakamura with a big shot and punish him for that recklessness. Now, in terms of the grappling, this is obviously Fernie Garcia's biggest weakness. We know his takedown offense isn't great, we know his ground game isn't great, and we know that this is Nakamura's biggest strength. You can see him, you know, in his wrestling gear here. So Nakamura is a good offensive wrestler, decent grappling control. And if the fight goes to the ground, Nakamura should have a pretty big edge. But again, you know, we don't know how Nakamura is going to look into the second and third round if Garcia can weather the early storm, right? Maybe Nakamura adrenaline dumps, burns himself out, and Garcia can have more success in the second and third round. We just don't know. Nakamura could have the best gas tank in the UFC or the worst. We have no idea. We haven't really seen him tested into that second and third rounds. So from a betting point of view, this isn't the type of fight that I want to bet, because Nakamura is better than Fernie Garcia everywhere, but his odds reflect that, with him being a massive favourite. So very little upside in betting Nakamura this weekend. On the flip side, I don't really want to bet Garcia, because it does look like, you know, Nakamura is the better striker and the better grappler. I really like Nakamura. I think he's very good. It's just his advantages are baked into the odds. So I'm obviously going to be passing on this fight. If you really want to bet this fight, it has to be dog or pass. Garcia at big underdog odds does give you the better risk to reward ratio. There's a chance he catches Nakamura with a big shot and punishes him for the recklessness. There's a chance Nakamura will adrenaline dump and fade into the second and third rounds with how aggressive he fights. But those aren't the kinds of things I want to be betting on. I want to put my money in stronger positions than that. So this one is an easy pass. In terms of the over-under on this one, it's very difficult because we know how aggressive Nakamura is. So while Garcia is very tough, Nakamura is very tough. When you have a guy as aggressive as Nakamura, something's got to give, because you know Nakamura won't take a backward step. He won't stop attacking. So either he's going to get counted and KO'd, or Garcia is going to wilt under the pressure that, you know, Nakamura puts on him. So for that reason, it's more likely that the fight will end inside the distance. But the over 1.5 rounds at slight underdog odds is pretty interesting to me. It's a risky bet because, again, Nakamura forces the exchanges, pushes the action. But, you know, Fernie Garcia is a tough Mexican. Nakamura is also pretty tough. When you got two tough guys going up against one another that don't want to lose, they have no quit in them. 7.5 minutes can kind of fly by. So that is interesting. I'm not sure if I'll bet it myself, but that's something you might want to research yourself, take a look at. In terms of the prop bets on this one, yeah, it's tricky, man. It is tricky. Very tricky. It's tricky because there's so many different ways that the fight could play out. I don't have a strong feeling on the props. We will give them a miss. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Giga Chikadze against Alex Caceres. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Chikadze is the favourite at average odds of around 1.41, which is going to be minus 245 for an implied probability of 71%. We take a look at the odds on Caceres. He's around an average of, say, 2.95, which is going to be plus 195 for an implied probability of 34%. So Caceres is 35 years old, 5'10" with 73.5-inch reach. Chikadze, 34 years old, 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size. Nothing major going on there. And it's a very interesting matchup between two talented, skilled, experienced strikers. So straight away, let's just get the grappling out the way, because this is more than likely going to be a stand-up fight. I'd be very surprised if this fight went to the ground, because both guys are pretty weak on the ground. They both have pretty bad takedown defense, and they're both pretty weak off their back. Not the best ground games. I know on paper Alex Caceres is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but the ground game has always been his Achilles heel. If this fight did go to the ground, I would say Chikadze is probably the better wrestler, but Caceres has the better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and is the more technical submission grappler. I don't think it's going to matter, because I doubt this fight is going to go to the ground, but it's a difficult fight to call on the ground because both guys are pretty weak off their back, and so whoever would be in top position more likely to have the advantage. But Chikadze definitely the more physically imposing grappler out of the two. Now in the breakdown video this week for Taila Santos versus Blanchfield, we spoke a lot about physicality, and this is another matchup where physicality does play a part in the matchup, because In terms of striking technique, I don't see a massive advantage for either guy. I would definitely say that Chikadze is better defensively than Caceres, and to be fair, he's the better boxer. But Caceres has got better footwork, better movement, and a better kicking game. What really sets these two apart when it comes to striking is power and physicality. So Caceres is likely going to throw a higher volume of strikes than Chikadze in this fight. The problem is that Chikadze is much more physically imposing and hits much harder. So while Caceres will likely have more volume over Chikadze, Chikadze can negate a lot of the volume that Caceres is going to put on him with big singular power strikes. They're going to get a bigger reaction from the crowd and, you know, leave a bigger impression on the judges. So it is a tricky fight for Caceres because I don't think he's got the power to really trouble Caceres on the feet. Like I say, Caceres is likely to put good volume together, but Chikadze is pretty good defensively. So, you know, the strikes that Caceres is landing are probably for the most part going to be body kicks, leg kicks, which don't leave the biggest impression on the judges. And Chikadze is probably going to be able to control the centre of the octagon like he did against Edson Barboza, put Caceres on the back foot, and Chikadze's, you know, power, physicality is probably going to be too much for Caceres to handle. However, I do think that this fight could be pretty close, because the problem with Chikadze is that he does slow down as fights wear on, and in every round that passes, his volume drops. Whereas Caceres got a very, very good gas tank, throws a high volume of strikes. You know, if anything, he gets better as the fight wears on. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Caceres edge the second and third round by outstriking Chikadze if Chikadze starts to slow. So it's one of those matchups where, for me, the odds are exactly where they should be. Chikadze deserves to be the favourite because he's the more powerful, physically imposing guy that will land the harder, more damaging shots on the feet. But Caceres can make this close competitive by being tough, durable, having good footwork, good movement, and by landing a decent volume. It's a very good fight. It's one of those fights where it's the odds are pretty much bang on this one. So I wouldn't bet this fight if I were you. It's one of those fights where I am not at all tempted to bet either guy, but if you want some action, if you want to bet on this fight to make watching it more entertaining, I guess you have to go dog or pass Caceres. For me, betting on Chikadze as such a steep favourite just doesn't feel very good. It's a pretty bad risk to reward ratio. So I just prefer to have the underdog, but it isn't particularly likely Caceres wins, and I would avoid this fight if I were you. In terms of the over-under, both these guys are absolutely tough as nails. We saw Chikadze take a load of damage in his last fight against Calvin Kattar, refused to quit, he hung in there, and we've seen Caceres in some wars over the years as well. Both guys tough as nails, very good chins, very durable, very difficult to put away. As a result, very likely this fight goes the distance. The odds aren't great, but I'd be surprised if this one ended inside the distance. Pretty likely this one goes to a decision. In terms of how they match up, or in terms of the prop bets on this one, Chikadze by decision is really the only prop I would consider, and the odds are pretty bad on that. The odds are absolutely terrible. So again, you're not getting a particularly good risk to reward ratio if you bet that. It's not something I'll be betting myself. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, the rematch that we've all been clamouring for, the rematch we all wanted, which was Anthony Smith against Ryan Spann. So this is one of the very few fights on this card in the even money odds range. There's only 2, 3, maybe 4 fights max in the even money odds range on this card. This is one of them. So let's refresh so we get the latest odds. And we can see that Ryan Spann is the slight favourite at average odds of around 1.77, which is minus 130 for an implied probability of 57%. If we take a look at the odds on Anthony Smith, he is around an average of 2.10, which is going to be plus 110 for an implied probability of 48%. So Smith, 35 years old, 6'4", with a 76-inch reach, and Ryan Spann, 32 years old, 6'5", with an 81.5-inch reach. So a couple of X factors to dig into on this one. The first being that Ryan Spann, all the way back in 2021, so 2 years ago, lost to Anthony Smith. So Anthony Smith won the first fight, which is interesting because obviously Anthony Smith is the underdog in this fight, which is, you know, it's an interesting topic of discussion because he's already beaten Ryan Spann. Another X factor is that Ryan Spann has a 5-inch reach advantage over Anthony Smith. Now, Spann doesn't use this reach advantage particularly well. He's kind of a wild, reckless striker, but it's better to have a 5-inch reach advantage than to not have a 5-inch reach advantage. That is the way I would look at it. The other X factor that I would mention on this one is that I do think Anthony Smith is on a pretty steep decline. Now, he's only 35 years old, which isn't particularly old for a light heavyweight. But remember what I always say when it comes to age. You know, age is just a number. And, you know, all the data around age is only as useful as how it's interpreted. So Anthony Smith has had over 50 pro fights. He's been knocked out a bunch of times. You know, he had his teeth knocked out against Glover Teixeira. He's suffered multiple injuries. He's been in lots of wars. He's taken lots of damage. That all adds up. And I would imagine that Smith is dealing with a lot of, you know, long-term injuries, chronic health issues as a result of all that damage that he's taken over the years. Now, you know, when you look at age, I always compare fighters to cars, right? If you've got a 1-year-old car with 200,000 miles on the clock, or a 10-year-old car with 2,000 miles on the clock, even though the 10-year-old car is 9 years older than the 1-year-old car, the 10-year-old car is probably going to be a lot more reliable because it's only done 2,000 miles, right? It's not going to have anywhere near as much wear and tear on the engine, the components, as the 1-year-old car that's done 200,000 miles. That's where I would look at a guy like Anthony Smith. He has a lot of miles on the clock. He's slow. His reflexes look sharp. Not as durable as he used to be. Does appear to be on a pretty steep decline, but he's still an absolute warrior, still tough as nails. We love Anthony Smith, and he's also beaten Ryan Spann in the past as well, which it means something, right? It was only 2 years ago. Now, this is one of those fights where I just look at it and straight away, very, very early on into the research, with memories of their first fight fresh in my mind, I have absolutely zero interest on betting a fight like this. This fight is an absolute minefield for betting. I mean, even if you just go back and watch their first fight from 2 years ago, like, if you watch that, there's no way you can feel confident in either guy this weekend because it's absolute chaos. Both guys get rocked on the feet. Both get put in bad positions on the ground. Both give up position on the ground. Both make a lot of mistakes. It's just absolute carnage and absolute chaos. In a matchup such as this, where both guys have so many issues, it's just difficult to trust either of them. And so for this breakdown, for the most part, what we're going to be doing is focusing a lot on the issues between these two, because there are a lot of them. So if we focus on striking, the issue with Anthony Smith when it comes to striking is that he doesn't really have much power in his hands. He's pretty bad defensively, and he's also very slow. This is a bad combination against someone like Ryan Spann that covers distance very quickly, has big power in his hands, and he's very reckless and aggressive. Ryan Spann is one of these guys that loves $50,000 bonus checks because he has that kill or be killed style. He's extremely bad defensively, he's extremely reckless, and he's also very, very chinny. If you go watch Ryan Spann's fights, he gets rocked, wobbled, dropped in pretty much every fight. If you go and watch like Ryan Spann's last 15 fights, you're lucky if you can find 3 or 4 of those fights where he hasn't been rocked, wobbled, or dropped. He finds himself in a lot of trouble in virtually every fight. And the reason is he has that kill or be killed style. He's very aggressive. He like bum rushes his opponent through in these big wide looping hooks, leaving himself wide open. And he's a little bit chinny. He can't take a shot. We've seen him wobbled off jabs, weak shots, all kinds of stuff. Now, Anthony Smith isn't that dangerous on the feet. He's a lot slower than Ryan Spann. But when you're as chinny as Spann, when you're as wild and reckless as Spann, you can get caught. And we see Ryan Spann get caught very, very frequently. So out of the two, there's issues with both of them on the feet. Spann is definitely the more dangerous out of the two. He's more powerful. He's faster. Smith is slower, reflexes aren't quite there, nowhere near as dangerous. Neither guy is particularly durable at this stage in their careers. Spann, more dangerous though. Now when it comes to grappling is kind of the exact same as how these two match up when it comes to striking, because Spann is more physically imposing on the ground, more aggressive on the ground. He's a more dangerous submission grappler on the ground, but he also makes a lot of mistakes. He gives up position a lot. He's quite weak off his back. Just very, very bad grappling IQ. Anthony Smith has those problems as well, don't get me wrong. He's weak off his back, gives up position a lot, bad grappling IQ. But I feel the real difference between these two is it's less likely Smith will find himself in a bad position and capitulate. So if you put Smith in a bad position on the ground, he's more likely to kind of, hang in there and work through it. If you put Spann in a bad position on the ground, he's very, very likely to capitulate and tap out. So ultimately, this is one of those fights where I think you are absolutely out of your mind if you bet this fight. It's an absolute minefield. I'd probably favour Spann a little bit because of how much more dangerous than Smith he is. But Spann has such bad fight IQ. He's so fragile that I wouldn't trust him to take my dog for a walk and bring him back without walking into a lamppost and getting knocked out or something like that. So there's no way I could bet Ryan Spann on this fight, man. This matchup is an easy pass. My slight lean is towards Spann, but if you like money, don't bet this fight. It's a fucking minefield. It's chaos. You can't trust either guy. It's a very, very easy pass. So if we look at the over-under on this one, obviously with Spann having that kill or be killed style, very likely this fight ends inside the distance. You look at Spann's record, not very often this guy goes to a decision. In fact, you've got to go all the way back to 2020, 3 years ago, for the last time Spann went to a decision, and before that, it would be 5 years ago against Luis Henrique. So he's only been to a decision twice in the last 6 years, and a hell of a lot of fights. So I would not be betting the over on this fight, especially with both guys struggling to take a shot, and both being pretty bad defensively. In terms of the prop bets on this one, because they're both so chaotic with bad fight IQ, it's very, very difficult to nail down a prop, because props are very specific bets. And with this fight, with there being so many different ways this fight could go, it's hard to drill down to being very specific with a prop. So yeah, I don't have a strong feeling on any of the props. I would give them a miss. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now, usually when we break down a main event fight, it's a really long, detailed, in-depth breakdown video where we spend 20-30 minutes analysing the main event matchup. But I think this is probably going to be the quickest main event breakdown I've done in a long time, because this fight is a bit dead from a betting point of view. We can see that Max Holloway is a pretty big favourite. At average odds are around 1.13, which is going to be minus 769 for an implied probability of 89%. And if we take a look at the odds on the Korean Zombie, Chan Sung Jung, he's around an average of, say, 6.50, which is going to be plus 550 for an implied probability of 15%. So Max Holloway is 31 years old, 5'11" with a 69-inch reach. Korean Zombie, 36 years old, 5'7", 72-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size. You can see that Korean Zombie is shorter, but that is offset by the fact that his reach is slightly longer than Holloway's. We can see the Korean Zombie 5 years older than Holloway, but both guys have been in a lot of wars. Both guys have got a lot of miles on the clock. Both guys have taken a lot of damage in their careers. Let's just break this one down and consider how they match up stylistically. So I wouldn't expect this fight to go to the ground. Obviously, we have seen Korean Zombie use more grappling heavy game plans in recent years. He obviously used a grappling heavy game plan to beat Dan Ige, but we know Max Holloway is virtually impossible to take down and hold down, so I can't see Korean Zombie being able to have success with a grappling heavy game plan in this fight. On the flip side, we have seen Holloway incorporate, grappling into his game plans more recently. His fight against Yair Rodriguez, a good example. But I think Holloway has got such a big advantage on the feet in this one. I can't see him looking to get this fight to the ground, because I think he'd be a little bit concerned about getting caught in a bad position. Korean Zombie probably has the advantage on the ground over Holloway, but Korean Zombie doesn't have the grappling to get Holloway down, so the only way the fight would go to the ground is if Holloway got knocked down or something like that and Korean Zombie jumped on top of him, maybe caught a kick, or if Holloway were to take him down, Holloway can eliminate the chance of that happening by obviously not taking Korean Zombie down. So this fight is probably going to be a stand-up fight. If the fight stays standing, obviously we know Holloway still an absolutely elite featherweight. We saw what he did to Arnold Allen. Chipped away at Allen, outstruck him by a decent margin, was very comfortable. He did take a decent amount of damage, did take some big shots, but all that really showed us is that Holloway has still got it. Chin's still very good, still very durable, still has great cardio, still an absolute nightmare when it comes to technique. So Korean Zombie has big knockout power. He's very dangerous on the feet, but Holloway, he's been in there with some extremely dangerous strikers, right? Volkanovski 3 times, Dustin Poirier couldn't finish him, Yair Rodriguez, dangerous striker, Arnold Allen, dynamite in his hands. None of these guys could knock Max Holloway out. Will Korean Zombie be the first guy to do it? Maybe, but it isn't that likely. And there's no way the Korean Zombie is going to match the technique and the volume of Holloway. So if the fight stays standing, I'm worried that this might look like a rerun of Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar, where Holloway just completely outclasses Korean Zombie on the feet, racks up major volume, racks up major damage, and just completely dominates. And that's pretty much how I see this fight going. So from a betting point of view, absolutely dead from a betting point of view. Holloway should win this fight relatively comfortable, aside from Korean Zombie landing a flash KO, which we've discussed will not be an easy thing to do. Holloway should outstrike him by a wide margin, win very, very comfortably. But you can't bet Holloway because his odds are absolutely terrible. So if you really, 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 really want to bet this fight, I guess take Zombie. But you will probably be setting fire to your money. It's certainly not something I'm going to be betting. In terms of the over-under on this one, so the odds favour the fight not to go to a decision. I would agree with that. Obviously, Holloway is a decisionator, but when you look at how much damage he's been able to inflict on guys like Calvin Kattar and Brian Ortega, even though Korean Zombie is tough as nails, very difficult to put away, I do think it's going to be difficult for Korean Zombie to stand in front of Holloway for 25 minutes without taking so much damage that the ref is forced to step in and stop it. So I do agree that not going to decisions should be favoured, but I wouldn't bet it because both these guys are absolutely tough as nails with zero quit in them. And it's not going to be easy to get either of these out of there. So I would avoid the over-under on this one. In terms of the prop bets, the odds on Holloway to win by knockout or TKO are absolutely dreadful. Odds on him to win by decision are dreadful as well. Yeah, this fight is dead for props. With Holloway being such a big favourite, no value really at all on the props. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the subscribe button below. Like if you haven't already liked the video. Let's get that Gan Sergey Spivak live stream going next week. Also check out my website MMABettingTips.com. You've got a Discord server, live betting tips where we make money pretty much every month. You're gonna love it. Come on over, check it out. And also, if you like these breakdown videos for the main card fights, and you want to watch breakdown videos for all these fantastic prelim matchups we've got coming up this weekend, MMABettingTips.com, link in the description below. Check it out. Step right up, roll up, roll up, roll up. It's a deal, it's a steal. Sale of the fucking century. Have a great weekend, guys. Love you all, and I'll see you all next week with another breakdown video. Take care, everyone. Bye.